I wrote the book every weekend for a year, and that was a great part of my journey of integrating those things, doing the research, finding out what science could explain the laws of attraction. But then actually it was the response to the book that I think really hit me emotionally, that how much people wanted a very clear, pragmatic explanation of what you have to do with your brain and your thinking and your feeling and your action to bring the things that you want into your life. So I'll start with visualization and vision boards. The science behind them is quite similar. So it's basically about 3 processes that happen in the brain, and they are selective filtering, selective attention, and value tagging. Basically, we're bombarded with so much information, and this has been the case for a long time, but if you read a copy of the New York Times today, you would receive as much information from that one newspaper as somebody would in their entire lifetime 100 years ago. And even then, they were overly bombarded with information. So the brain has a natural filtering mechanism, which is that you don't need to notice things that aren't really relevant to your survival. So, for example, you don't notice your clothes on your body all day. We need to direct that filtering system. Otherwise, in a way, we're still wired just to survive and reproduce.
Need motivation?
Watch Top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because the thing that saved me as an entrepreneur was watching the stories of other successful entrepreneurs, and I learned from their advice, I learned from their motivation, and honestly, I have no idea where I would be if I didn't have those videos to inspire me. I still need them for myself today too, and I hope that they can inspire you as well. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Dr. Swart Bieber, and my take on our top 10 rules of success. Enjoy.
Things that will help us to thrive in the modern world may not necessarily be filtered in unless we're presenting visual images to our brain on a daily basis, or sitting down and closing our eyes and, visualizing the things that we want in our life or a certain outcome. If we do those practices, then the next process comes in, which is selective attention, which is that you notice the things that you're visualizing or you have on your vision board. It's like when you buy a new car and then you suddenly see it everywhere. So it's basically priming your brain to notice opportunities that will take you closer to your goals. And then value tagging is the brain's system of putting things in order of importance. And it does this in 2 ways. It does it in a cold or logical way and a warm or emotional way. So the logical things are basically the survival, the basics that we need to survive, like roof over our head, food on the table. And the warmer things are the ones that we might choose to put on our vision board. So they're the things, our dreams, our desires, goals that show that we're thriving rather than just kind of, surviving. So by repeatedly exposing your brain to these images, you're priming it to not just notice, but also grasp the opportunities that will take you closer to what you want. And that's why I call vision boards action boards, because I don't believe that you can create this fantasy image and sit at home and wait for it to come true. I believe that you need to be out there networking, dating, whatever it is, to get the things that you want.
Rule number 2 is keep your brain healthy.
What are the things that we can do to improve our brain performance?
So we talk about things like rest, which is sleep, and also sort of downtime. Nutrition is super important. So the brain is obviously a tiny proportion of your body weight, and only weighs a few kilos, but it uses up to 30% of the breakdown products of what you eat. So when you're asleep, your brain is eating up 20% of what you ate that day. When you're at work and focused on something, it's using up about a quarter of what you eat. And when you're stressed, it's using up to 30%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so obviously people think, what should I eat if I want to be healthy generally, or I want to lose weight, or I want to build muscle mass? But the sorts of people that, like you and the people that I work with aren't thinking enough about what should I be eating so I can make the best decisions today? What should I be eating so I can solve complex problems? What should I be eating so I can understand what's going on, like in terms of interpersonal communication in with my team, for example? And then there's everything from hydration, exercise, breathing, mindfulness, curiosity. Yeah. Like there's so many factors that contribute to brain health. And they're probably not dissimilar to things as a doctor that you would know contribute to cardiovascular health or gastrointestinal health. But, we at Heights feel that if you approach everything with a brain care first attitude, then you're kind of taking care of the rest of the stuff. Like if you eat and drink in a way that's good for your brain, your skin and your hair are going to look nicer. I mean, and that sounds like such a girly thing to say, but people make a lot of really important choices based on what they look like. And that's fine. And that probably has like beneficial effects on our, our brains and our guts as well. But considering this organ is so energy hungry and it's so important in terms of everything else that happens in your body, I feel like we need to flip that narrative so that it's starting with, okay, what things can I do today that are going to be the best for my brain?
Rule number 3 is focus on the good things.
One of the things about being conscious and not being on autopilot is basically controlling what you expose your brain to. Because the more you expose it to bad news, the more you're likely to live life through fear. We know, for example, that people who repeatedly looked at images of the Twin Towers going down, who had no personal connection to New York, could get PTSD. I mean, it's incredible that just exposing yourself repeatedly to bad news, especially with visual imagery, can actually traumatize you in a way that, you can't easily get over. So I'm very, very careful about what I look at, what I read. My social media feeds are carefully controlled to be as positive as possible. You're absolutely right that if you don't think about it and you look at bad news just before you go to sleep, then you think about young children. You've got young children. Even if they, read a book that's not that scary, but maybe has some monsters in it, then they can have nightmares, they can feel frightened. So everything that we expose our brain to has an impact, and we need to be much more mindful of that, especially because the gearing of the brain, it's 2 to 2.5 times more likely to focus on negatives than positives. So we need to be feeding our brain more positive things to keep ourselves confident and, moving forward positively.
Rule number 4 is learn about neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to grow and change. And you see that very clearly in children from 0 to 2, where they go from being completely helpless and vulnerable to walking, talking, managing their own bowels and bladders. Pretty incredible. There's a lot of change that goes on during the teenage years as well. It's more pruning away of neural pathways that you don't need anymore and readiness for socialization and reproduction. And then we used to think that process really slowed down or became quite passive from 25 to 60. Well, we used to think from 18. Now we know it's very active till 25. And what we also know is that if you do things to keep your brain flexible, you can make changes absolutely from 25 to 65 and maybe even beyond that. So I believe that manifestation is neuroplasticity. The process is underlined by neuroplasticity, which is that you have a certain way of thinking, behavior patterns, habits, and the more you repeat them and the more emotional intensity is associated with them, the stronger those pathways become.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5 is practice proper manifestation.
In the last 25 years or so, we have had much more sophisticated brain scanning technology, which shows how the brain works. Prior to that, we really understood a lot of how the brain works from seeing what happens when it goes wrong. So if somebody has a stroke or a brain tumor or a brain injury. Once we could scan healthy brains, we started to learn a lot more about this concept of neuroplasticity, which is that the brain grows and changes throughout life. Now, you've got 2 little girls, so you will know that from 0 to 2, they went from being completely vulnerable and helpless to walking, talking, being able to control their bladder and bowels, and, maybe even speaking several languages and having an opinion. So it's a massive burst of neuroplasticity. And we see that, very visibly in young children. Around the teenage years, there's some pruning of the brain to sophisticate it for adulthood, for sexual behavior, for emotional and social interaction. And that is quite an active process till we're about 25. We used to think it stopped when we physically stopped growing around the age of 18. But the really interesting area for us in manifestation and the laws of attraction is that from 25 to 65, you can do things that keeps your brain more plastic or flexible. And you can change the ways that you think, feel, and act. So to me, neuroplasticity underlies manifestation, and it's a 4-step process. It starts with raised awareness. So you need to know what you want to bring into your life or how you want your life to look or feel. Then it's focused attention, which is noticing maybe, negative thinking or certain behaviors or relationship patterns that are holding you back from getting what you want. And also noticing opportunities to get the things that you want, but really just building up your database of, okay, that doesn't work for me. When I do this, then, good things come into my life. The third part is deliberate practice. So that is going out there and doing the things that you need to manifest the things that you want into your life.
Got to do the work.
Got to do the work, totally. And the fourth part isn't really like a step in the process, but it's accountability, because it's very easy to start, particularly in New Year, and say, okay, these are all my resolutions and new things that I'm going to do. And then for most of us, that motivation doesn't, remain. Partly from the neuroscience, that's because we tend to pick goals that are too big, and it's better to break them down into bite-sized chunks. And that's the same for manifestation. Take small steps towards the things that you want. So if there are some things that are more in your control, like getting fit and healthy, then start doing that. And then if there's something that's less in your control, like getting married or having a baby, then give that a bit longer, but know that you are changing your brain by changing your behaviors. And have some form of accountability, whether it's a vision board, whether it's your partner, whether it's a therapist.
Rule number 6 is start journaling.
What does the neuroscience or evidence say around why journaling is legit?
Yeah, so at the very minimum, it's like a download of your emotions. And so with your, any emotions, negative thoughts, unfinished tasks, if you keep them in your brain-body system by just thinking about them in your mind, then you actually increase your cortisol levels, and cortisol correlates with stress. So it's like a pressure cooker building up. If you speak it out loud, write it out into a journal, or do physical exercise and literally sweat out some of that cortisol, then you're releasing those negative emotions, negative thought patterns, anxieties, worries about the future from your brain-body system. But and I'd love to know if you've done this or not. I had an insight which I just stumbled across by myself, but it really makes sense, obviously, from the neuroplasticity point of view, is that if you go back and read over your journal, you see your thought process laid out in front of you. You see your patterns of behavior. You see like your decision-making tools, whether it's more logical or more intuitive. You see what you've written about your relationships with people. And seeing that in your own handwriting, or, even if it's been synced up and typed out for you, just knowing that it's your words and what you've thought and what you've said, you can't run away from that. So it can be like so insightful and enlightening. And I've had that definitely with all of that stuff like emotions and thought patterns and intuition. But I also had it when I used to go to Boston twice a year to teach at MIT. And I remember with the travel and the jet lag, just feeling that I was having these small muscular twitches, and it was noticeable in bed at night. And I decided to read back over, not for that reason, but just anyway, I decided to read back over my journal from 6 months earlier when I was last in Boston. And I'd written in my journal, I'm getting these little muscular twitches. And so I worked out that I'd become magnesium deficient by flying. And so I basically, hence why I was carrying so many bottles of things with me when I was traveling, really upped my dose of magnesium for the trips, and it never happened again.
Oh, wow.
And if I hadn't read back I would never put 2 and 2 together. I would have thought it was just happening now and it hadn't happened before.
Rule number 7 is make small progress daily.
I try to do the right things about sleep and everything else, but I don't get stressed about it if I can't.
Yeah.
So that's a really big thing for me. I try to eat right. I try to remember to take my supplements. I journal when I can. I meditate when I can. But if I don't do it, then I don't get stressed. I would say that is a really big learning for me. I think that's a really big tip. I would also say it's better to change 10 things by 1% than try to change one thing by 10%. So work on micro tweaks to your routine, like go to bed half an hour earlier, do a digital detox over one weekend, drink a bit more water than you normally do, try to increase your steps by 1,000 to 2,000 per day for a week and see what happens. So for small things like that, build up because you start to feel better, your brain becomes more powerful, and then you're able to do, some of the bigger goals that you may have been saving up.
Rule number 8 is increase your water intake.
75% of the brain is made up of water, and of the solid matter, 60% is made up of fat. So the focus should be on good fats and hydrating foods in your diet. So that's like oily fish if you eat fish, eggs if you eat eggs, and then avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oils, obviously leafy greens, but particularly hydrating foods like cucumber, melon. And then the best foods for your brain are dark-skinned foods. So like beets, black beans, eggplant. And the good news is that dark chocolate over 80% and organic coffee count in that too, because in the skins of dark foods, there's something called anthocyanins, which are really strong antioxidants that support your brain, protect it from inflammation, but also support growth of new cells. So I just try to eat as many of those things as I can. Also because of the gut-brain connection, fermented foods, so like kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi. And then, just eating around that, the sort of right proportion of protein, fat, and carbs. So just not too much carbs, but some whole grains you need to make serotonin, for example. The hydration equation is 0.5 liter of water for every 30 pounds of your body weight. So you need to work out what that ideal number is and then see where you're at the moment. And if there's a big gap, just increase it by 1 glass of water per day over a sort of, 1 to 2 week period. Otherwise, you're going to notice you're going to the bathroom a lot more.
Rule number 9 is sleep with good posture.
Can we spend a moment on sleep posture?
Yeah, of course. I actually did a reel for you on Instagram. Yeah. And I was saying that the best position for cleaning out your brain overnight, which is a very active, forcible flushing process of getting rid of the sort of toxins that build up through the wear and tear of daily life. And this process takes 7 to 8 hours, is lying on your side. So basically left or right side, but that's better than lying on your front or your back. And it's something to do with the positioning of the vessels in your neck. So basically the fluid that the brain sits in, which also is, there are ventricles in the brain, that forces toxins out overnight. And if your head is to the side, then it's easier to expel them. It's called the glymphatic system in the brain, but basically it goes into your lymphatic system and then gets expelled from your body. Yeah, so
I love it.
Yeah.
Side sleeping.
Yeah. I have a special pillow that makes me sleep on my side.
Oh, really? What is it?
It's a temporal memory foam pillow that's got a ridge so that it fits nicely into the side of your head and neck and shoulder.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is spend time in nature.
You mentioned nature and looking at the stars and stuff. What's inherently good about nature?
Yeah, so this has really come up as a big one in the last few years. And I'm not sure if it's coincidental with the pandemic and having been locked up or locked up, but also had more opportunity to maybe commune with nature than we did in our hectic lifestyles before. But the brain benefits of time spent in nature are massive. And whenever I'm asked a question that I don't necessarily factually know the answer to straight away, I always take it back to evolution. There's a reason that our brains were wired in a certain way. And when we first became Homo sapiens, we walked on the savannah. We walked in the land. We ate what we could hunt, fish, or harvest. And so our relationship with nature was we were dependent on it, but it was also a huge threat to us. Floods, storms, fires. It's the symbiotic relationship. And what we've done through agriculture and construction is just move ourselves further and further away from that. And even if you just think of one super scientific example of that, is that the quality and diversity of our gut flora has diminished so much since we lived in the cave. It's reduced by, I don't want to get the number wrong, but it's a shocking factor, hundreds. And agriculture's contributed to that. Antibiotics have contributed to that. Obviously antibiotics save lives, and, it's been an amazing advance for us as humans. But, the fact that we eat food that's not as diverse as it used to be, that we don't necessarily eat those natural things, the prebiotic and probiotic foods and supplements that allow our gut bacteria to flourish, and we eat so much processed food, and that stress, alcohol, and antibiotics will damage our gut microbiome. That's one of the huge consequences of having moved away from nature. And people ask all sorts of questions that we don't know all the answers to yet about why do we have more diseases like ME, like MS, like autism, like ADD. And some of the answers lie in that disconnection from nature and what that's done to how that's shaped our bodies and our brains.
Right.
And how we live as a result of that. Just take 1 minute to look at a leaf or a petal or a squirrel or something that's close up right in front of you in great detail. And then take 1 minute to look at a really large tree or building or a cloud in the distance and just see how that resets your nervous system. So there's a couple of, so that's basically taking yourself away from sharp focus to a wide vista, which is part of living in nature and on the savannah, is that we love having an uninterrupted view of the horizon. It's really restful for the brain.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then as well as 10 deep breaths, you can just do you can do a sharp intake of breath and just do a really long sigh as well. That's a nice little way to reset your nervous system. We've developed an appreciation for things that we may have taken for granted before. So I have been, in lockdowns, I've been with one other person, and it has certainly made me think. At first, I was like, well, if I'd been on my own, I would have been fine. But as the months drag on, and as it happens again and again, my heart just is so out there for people who've been through that on their own. That is not a healthy state for us. And so a lot of the work I've done in the last year is to encourage people to bathe rather than shower, because immersing yourself in warm water releases the same bonding hormones that you get from physical affection from a loved one. To massage your own body, to do gratitude practices that involve self-touch. So a lot more, being a lot more proactive about the fact that you maybe have been isolated alone, but also even with one affectionate person or, 2 or 3 affectionate people in your family, it's normal in a day to go out and shake hands or hug or kiss 8 to 12 people. And so that happens and you don't even really think about it. And they say that you need 8 hugs a day just to sort of stay mentally stable and 20 hugs a day to grow as a person who feels healthy and happy and they can take some risks. So I think suddenly demanding 20 hugs a day from one person is probably,
If your brain has seen something or experienced it through mental rehearsal, then when it comes across something similar in real life, it's less threatening. So uncertainty is the most threatening thing to your brain. Anything new is a huge threat to your brain, which is kind of counter to neuroplasticity, right? Because with neuroplasticity, I make myself do something new every year. So I've learned several languages.
Really?
Yeah.
How many languages do you know now?
I've learned 5 in my life. I'm not going to pretend I'm fluent.
Yeah. Are you fluent in any?
Yeah, so I was very lucky. I was brought up bilingual in English and an Indian language.
Okay.
And then from the age of 9, I learnt French at school.
Wow.
And then as an adult, I learnt 3 other languages at different times.
Gotcha.
Probably not so good at those ones. But, so during the pandemic, I actually made a statement in the beginning, which was, don't necessarily put pressure on yourself to like start a new career or learn a language. Then it went on for longer than we all thought it would. So I was actually on an Instagram live saying that I'd always wanted to learn the piano. And somebody sent me a DM and said, Dr. Tara, you can use the Flowkey app to teach yourself piano.
Flowkey, huh?
Yeah. It's a really, really cool app. And I'd been gifted a piano keyboard for Christmas by my husband. I am ashamed to say a year or 2 earlier and never used it. So in the pandemic, I did use the Flowkey app and teach myself.
Now you know how to play piano? More than Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?
Exactly. Yeah. And my husband gave me tennis lessons. And then I thought, okay, if I can learn piano and I can learn tennis and I can see how much I improve and I can see the muscle memory from when I played tennis from when I was at high school, can I apply that to looking at life through a happier lens? So it's a natural default for all of us to, loss aversion is one of the biggest gearings of the brain and it's essential to survival.
Loss aversion.
Yeah, so avoiding loss. And uncertainty, like I said, we don't like that. So we like things to be safe, we like them to be the same, we like to know what's going to happen. And equally, the brain wants to look out for danger to protect us. And during the pandemic, I'd been speaking for a few years about having a sabbatical. And a few people said to me, oh, now you can have a sabbatical. And I said, I'm locked up at home. I can't travel. I can't see my friends. I can't hug my stepson. It's not a sabbatical. It's not the sabbatical I dreamed of. And also, the mental health requirements were so vast that I felt I had to do my piece and really, speak to that through Instagram, through Zoom, and try to help people. So I was actually busier with work than ever before.
Sure. Trying to help people, yeah.
But I did start, I saw a lot of relationship breakups. I saw a lot of people get sick. A lot of people that I personally knew died during the pandemic. And it was easy to start to feel like, to focus on things like you can't see people, you can't travel. And I didn't want to see myself go down that road. So I got a coach. I believe in having therapy, having coaching, having supervision.
Love it. I love it.
And I worked on that. And she actually said to me, why can't you apply neuroplasticity to being happier? And because it's intangible, it's, you can make a vision board with a house and, a dream holiday and vacation and all that
for the material world.
Exactly.
But how do you create one for the emotional world?
I think there are, and that's why imagery is important because it can evoke a feeling.
Yes.
But I remember the moment I was standing sort of at the door to my garden and a really small, nice thing had happened. And I thought, isn't that lovely? And I actually checked myself and I thought, I notice when something goes wrong all the time. I don't always acknowledge when something goes right or is really good and happy. And so I could tell that I had changed, that I was noticing those things.
You didn't notice that before?
I mean, I'm sure I did sometimes with like big things.
The longer we have been experiencing something, the more deeply entrenched it is in our brain. And that's why the neural pathways that relate to things like the values that we hold, the roles that we play in our family and social circle, how boundaried we are or not, the expectations that we place on ourselves, and the secrets that we keep, can be so deeply embedded in the neural architecture of our brains that we're not really aware of how much they drive our behaviour. So essentially, these are subconscious or non-conscious beliefs that drive our thinking processes and then drive the actions that we take in the real world. The good news is that through neuroplasticity, you can choose sustainable new behaviours that will overwrite those old neural pathways that you have in your brain. It's important to remember that neuroplasticity can work for good or for bad. So you also need to be so mindful of what you're exposing your brain to. Everything you see on the TV, read in the news, the people that you meet, and the emotions that you experience and the thoughts that you let go round and round in your brain. Now, there's a process for embedding sustainable behaviour change in your brain, and that starts with raised awareness. So you really have to bring from non-conscious to conscious what it is that's driving your behaviours and thinking processes at the moment. You can do that through meditation, journaling, therapy, or just talking to good friends. Once you've identified what might be holding you back from success, what barriers you may be placing in front of yourself, or just old patterns of thinking and behaviour that no longer serve you, you can start to focus attention on certain situations or relationships where these behaviours tend to show themselves up. At first, it's important just to notice where you could have done something differently, rather than jumping straight into action. Once you've spent some time reflecting on this, and you have a few good examples of ways that you think or behave that you'd like to change, you can start the third step of deliberate practice, which is choosing a new way of behaving, or choosing a new thought or positive affirmation or mantra that you can use to overwrite old, unhelpful thought patterns, and then deliberately practicing these actions and thoughts until they become so strongly embedded in your brain that they become the default pathway for your brain to send energy along. The more you repeat something and the more emotional intensity there is associated with it, the more likely the neurons are to wire together and form new neural pathways that make you the new you and give you the best life that you can have. And this is really from the root level up. It's not superficial behaviour change, it's changing the way that you now do things. The final part of that process is about accountability. We all have so many good intentions, but we don't always see them through. And that's why an app like Living Ashram, or a buddy that you're going through this behaviour change process with, really helps you to be much more successful than if you just have vague thoughts about changing a way of being or acting. The evidence from really committing to a behaviour change like this is so strong that even the field of research around epigenetics, which is the effect of the environment on your genes, shows that if you think in a different way, act in a new way, give up lifestyle behaviours that are actually holding you back from being the best self that you can be, things like stress, smoking, drinking, not exercising, eating badly, that you can actually change the expression of your genes. So we all have parts of our genes that can be switched on or off. So even if we have certain likelihoods of getting certain diseases or living to a certain age, through our thoughts and our behaviours, we can change some of those outcomes. Pretty incredible. One way to approach this is through positive visualisation. So you can visualise yourself healthy and well, and you can really take that to the core of you and see yourself exhibiting these good behaviours and visualise the outcome that that would have for you in the future. Another way of priming your brain to make sure that you stay accountable to these goals that you really want to reach is to create what I call an action board. Now, this is like a vision board. It's a collage of images, metaphorical or literal, that represent all the things that you really want in life. But the scientific part says that you also have to take goal-orientated action towards making these things come true. You can't just sit at home and fantasize about them coming true. So if you create an action board, you look at it every day, you visualize it coming true, and you take the actions, whether it's from the brain-body connection actions that you committed to, or something to do with a longer, more sustainable behaviour change, and you keep doing them, you'll see the results rolling in. And this really comes back to Living Ashram's motto of root level up, whole human approach to health, wealth and well-being. So it's about really committing and seeing that through in every aspect of your body, your thoughts, your emotions, and your spirit.
A strong negative motivator gets us into action. Sometimes a really strong positive one will do that too, but not as strongly as a negative motivator. So I'm thinking, for example, when I had my wedding come up and I wanted to look a certain way and for the whole wedding to feel a certain way, I did a lot of things I wouldn't normally do to try to make sure that happened, but that was unusual. And I remember thinking then, okay, this is a really positive motivator, but most of the time we do things to avoid a perceived loss, or we do things because things have gone wrong for us and we need to try to make it better. And actually that is very explained by science, because one of the strongest gearings of our brain from evolution is called loss avoidance. And the brain is 2 to 2.5 times as primed to avoid loss as it is to get a reward. Do you remember I mentioned I mentioned 6 ways of thinking? I may not have classified them as the brain agility model. You said, what's the source? And I said, it's your fully integrated brain power. And so I put that into 6 categories, which are mastering your emotions, knowing yourself, which is the brain-body connection, trusting your gut, which is intuition, making good decisions. It's logic. Logic has to be in there, but it's just one of the 6. Staying motivated and resilient to reach your goals. And then the final one, which is kind of the culmination of those 5, is creating the life that you desire. So in that model, I talk about using all of the different ways that you have to think to manifest real world outcomes. But I'd also like to say at this point that I was one of those people who was told at school that I wasn't creative because I wasn't good at art. And so I wanted to
My headmaster, or no, brother John, was it? It was a Zavarian Catholic high school, sent me to the headmaster saying I couldn't possibly be this bad at art. I must be painting this way just to piss him off.
Oh. And look what you've created, right?
I'm still shake, though, if you give me a paintbrush. And someday I will get to challenge myself on that. But that, like the root beer, is still in me.
Well, do you remember that quote from the book? If somebody tells you you can't paint, by all means paint.
Yes.
So I think, I want to give that to you as a gift. But yeah, I mean, things like that stay with you for ages. If you're like 11 and you're told that you're not creative, I believed I wasn't creative till I was 35. I fully believed I was not creative. And all my friends are creative in the obvious sense of the word. And I sort of thought, isn't it strange how all my friends are creative, but I'm not? And there were a few friends that said, but you are. But I was so shut off to believing that that was true that I didn't even question it or say, what do you mean? Or, explore it. So for me, there was like a bang kind of, a crisis moment that changed everything. But one of the reasons I wrote The Source is that it shouldn't have to be like that. We can all bring that into our lives without necessarily having a crisis. So I wanted to reframe creativity and just make it about creating your own life. And so manifestation is basically believing that you have more agency around creating, what you want in your life rather than that life just happens to you. I totally understand that it feels like that for people a lot of the time. And, I use this analogy where I say, if you're going on a car journey and would you rather be the person in the driving seat, choosing the destination and how you get there, or are you happy to be in the passenger seat and just be driven around, not know where you're going and the route that you take? And so for a lot of people, life can feel like you're in the passenger seat, and understanding neuroscience is about putting yourself in the driver's seat. So the manifestation part is how much can you contribute to actually bringing into your life the things that you really, really want? And so it's a bit of a gray area because to me, it overlaps with magnetic desire, which is something that you really, really, really want. So there has to be a strong emotional component to it. And then the actions that draw that into your life. So I'm not one of those people that says if you visualize something or make a vision board or, imagine an ideal future that you should just wait for it to come true because you thought about it. I'm very much about doing the actions that progress you towards that goal becoming true. And so the science around manifestation and magnetic desire and vision boards is a 3-step concept in the brain, which is selective attention, selective filtering, and value tagging. And basically, we're bombarded with so much information all the time, everything we smell, hear, see, everyone we meet, that the brain naturally filters most of that out and brings our attention to the things that are relevant for our survival and tags those things in order of importance. And there's both a logical and an emotional component to why certain things are important to us. So you can imagine if you're trying to hold down the day job, if you're trying to put food on the table, that filtering process happens quite automatically. And it's not thinking, what's the best thing that could ever happen to me in my life? How do I really want my life to look like in 5 years' time? It's not doing that. It's just doing, how do I survive like in the next short term? So paying attention to manifestation, and one of the mediums for doing that is a vision board, is a way of priming your brain to notice and grasp opportunities that might otherwise have passed you by.
The sort of the intentionality of what you do. So you can do the same thing. Like, okay, so intermittent fasting is a great example. There's a huge difference between people who say, oh, I forget to eat breakfast, and people who eat like me, which is only between 12 noon and 8 p.m. every day, because of the intention. It actually has a different effect on your body. Yeah.
So it's like your body's like burning more because you're intentionally doing that, or you're losing more weight or something?
I won't go so far as to say it's burning more or you're losing more weight, but again, in neuroscience, there's a difference between intentional mind wandering and just slipping off into daydreaming. And so if you slip off into daydreaming, that means your attention isn't the best. And it's actually kind of a bad sign in terms of your focus and your concentration. But if you intentionally let your mind wander, then actually that leads to more creative thinking.
The threats have changed from physical to psychological or social. Although that threat also existed because we could only really thrive as part of a tribe in the cave. And that was literally for physical warmth as well as affection and, looking after each other's children and sharing responsibilities. Now, there aren't as many, in that way anyway, physical threats to our safety or our life. But the social threat of being rejected, being lonely, being abandoned, that's still very, very strong in our wiring. And then other things, because obviously now we have money, for example, that the idea of losing your job, losing your lifestyle, those have become, sort of potential social threats to your safety as well. And, there's so many more. But I would say that financial and relational have become the biggest threats to our safety. So I think obvious examples of that are staying in a relationship where you're not really happy, but you think, well, it's better than being single again, kind of thing. And because that wiring has been there for so long, and of course in Lacey's work, she talks about wiring that has been there since childhood for us as individuals. And we have, made it very clear that the longer an issue has been there, the harder it is to bring it from subconscious to conscious and then deal with it. This is even beyond that. This is for generations and millennia. So it's a very strong default. And it's really every decision that you make is based on, is the world a safe place? Can I do this and still be healthy and happy? And you mentioned a specific, which is not watching the news. Well, I don't know any neuroscientist that I'm friends with who watches the news. And that's the reason, because we're wired to default to loss aversion. If we continually tell our brain that there's danger out there, there's bad people out there, there's accidents out there, you will not want to take the healthy risks that you could to make your life better because you're too aware of the possible dangers.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag Believe down in the comments below, on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Gabby Bernstein, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Your presence is your power. If you want to live in that life of flow, if you want to attract that partner, if you want to get that book out into the world, if you want to make more money, if you want to